Is my conversation with Lue Elizondo, the former director of the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, also known as ATIP.
Ross, it is my sincere and true honor and privilege to be here with you today.
So how do you do this? Like, how do you balance trying to bring this conversation, which may end up being the single most important conversation that the human species has ever faced, and balance that along with everything currently going on in the world, especially given your history outside of this topic? How do you balance that in your mind? And actually, maybe more importantly, how do you balance that in your heart?
Wow. Great question. I've never been asked that before. Balancing usually requires having to make a determination what's important and what is less important, and then prioritizing and lifting. That's where the word balance comes in, right? Where you seek harmony in something, and balance is part of that harmony. Unfortunately, if everything is a priority, nothing is a priority. So you have to make that determination inside what is important. And for me, the truth is the most important, whether that truth is about the issues we're dealing with now in Crimean Peninsula and the Ukraine, or it's talking about something potentially existential for a species like UFOs. At the end of the day, the truth is the truth. My job was, as a spy for the U.S. intelligence community, was always to find the truth and report on the truth, whether it was hunting terrorists or hunting spies or hunting UFOs. It's really kind of the same thing. And so the priority for me, as long as you're focused on telling the truth to the American people, then that needs to be the priority, and whatever that may be, right? In this particular case, it's about the reality of UAP, or I guess in the vernacular, UFOs.
Wow, that's a perfect answer. Actually, like up until very recently, like the past couple of days, my approach to this was going to be to kind of slowly introduce the audience to this, because I have a younger audience, as we've talked about. And after talking to several of them and some of the stuff that's going on around the world this week, they're not dumb. Like they're the most open-minded generations that this planet has ever seen. And they've literally had everything else thrown at them up until this point, including, like we talked about earlier, the shit show that our generations are going to be leaving behind for them. So let's just dive in, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, let's do it, Ross.
Okay.
Happy to do so.
Perfect. So first, and I guess however you see fit, can you introduce who you are, how you became involved in this topic, and how we got here today?
Sure. My name is Lue Elizondo, or Luis Elizondo, as some people know me. I was a career spy for the U.S. intelligence community. And in 2008, I was asked to be part of a very small program in the Pentagon at the time, very sensitive program, called ATIP. What was ATIP? Well, in short, it was a program that studied UFOs for the U.S. government. In 2010, I was asked to take responsibility to be in charge of the program, and I ran it until 2017. My background is counterintelligence. I was a career special agent in counterintelligence. I was a senior special agent in charge several times overseas, and never really gave much thought about UFOs before. Wasn't particularly interested in science fiction, never really had the luxury or the time to pursue it. It wasn't until 2008 that I learned the reality of UFOs is real. And by the way, our government takes it very seriously. And so should you. So should your audience. Look, you're absolutely right, Ross. This generation that we have here is by far the smartest, most competent and capable that has ever walked the face of this planet. It is the epitome of what I would consider human evolution at this point. But with that comes a great responsibility, right? Because now that we have entered this information age where everything is literally at the tips of your fingers, where in my generation, I had to go to a library and look through a Dewey Decimal System. The entire world's in the palm of your hands. That's very powerful. U.S. and other governments, their intelligence apparatus spend billions of dollars each year to possess the information that most people have in the palm of their hands. And think about that for a minute. Knowledge is power. And so this new generation that's coming up is the future of our country. It is the future of the world, in fact. And you're right. Our generation kind of screwed it up, didn't we? Here we are, we're talking about issues, whether it's global climate change or issues right now in the Ukraine or in the South China Sea, or geopolitical issues where nobody agrees. You have this partisanship back and forth between, liberal and conservatives, and you have economic inflation now, and you have COVID, which is a mass pandemic. That's a lot to put on the shoulders of this new generation. It's a lot. It's a lot more than we had. And it's important that they can filter fact from fiction, because in this wonderful tool we call a cell phone that connects you to the world can also isolate you if you're not careful. It can also be used to deceive. And so there's an extra responsibility on this new generation to really, really understand what is out there, and to be able to discern fact from fiction, because as much as there is good information on this, there's also a lot of bad information. There's a lot of harm that can be done, as we know, through information. And so there's now more than ever is there a burden on this new generation to be especially savvy, especially critical on what they read and what they hear, and more importantly, to be part of the solution. This generation, if it's good, this is the generation that's either going to sink or swim, and you're either going to fix this for the rest of us, or it's just going to go down the tubes. And I'm very, very optimistic. I have two daughters that would be right after the, considered millennials, I guess. And it's incredible. I learn something new every day from them. I see a lot of hope in this next generation, where some people may be a little bit more critical. I see a lot of hope.
So addressing the hope part of that, because my communications with a lot of the younger people is they don't see hope. Where do you find that hope from? And where you just said, you find that hope, from your daughters and things like that. Where do you recommend other people find that hope from? Because there's not a lot of it going around, it doesn't seem.
Hope is a funny thing. You can find hope in all sorts of places. I've stared at the wrong end of a gun too many times. So for me, I see hope all sorts of places. When I see people exercising their freedom of expression, and they're having a conversation online, or they're taking to the streets to protest something, whatever that cause may be, that's hope for me. Even though I may not agree with the message all the time, that's hope. That means people are getting engaged, and they want to see change for the good. And especially on a topic like this, where we're talking about UFOs, right? This is a topic that's been relegated to the shadows, and has had a lot of stigma and taboo associated with it for the last 75 years. So it's no wonder people don't want to talk about it. But this generation doesn't care about stigma and taboo. They just want to get to the truth of things. And this generation is hungry for facts. And they're a lot more accepting of the fact that our species, in the final analysis, may not necessarily be the only life form in the universe. If I can, let me digress for a minute. I'm going to try to make this short. But we if you want to know if life is in the universe, one only has to look around and see that life is abundant, comes in all different shapes and sizes and forms, and that's just on this planet, right? And we spend millions of dollars each year looking for signs of microbial life on let's say Mars, and we spend lots of money looking for technosignatures in our Milky Way galaxy through programs like SETI. But we've been here a long time as a species. We've been here for over 100,000 years as Homo sapiens sapien. Is it possible, in the quest for answering that question, are we alone in the universe, that maybe that question has already been answered? Maybe they found us first, and there is enough information right now that we have in the U.S. government to substantiate that is a very real possibility.
Wow. So going back to when you were asked to be part of ATIP, were there conversations that prepared you for the reality shock that you were about to face?
There were no questions that prepared me for what I was about to get into. People often say, "Oh, it must have been fun and must have been exciting." No, it was pretty sobering. I liken this conversation to like having a conversation with a loved one about maybe cancer. Now, the good news is the diagnosis looks fine. You're going to recover, but it's a serious conversation. This is something that we are challenging people to reevaluate their philosophical, psychological, sociological, and theological belief system. Now, anytime you ask humanity to do something like that, it usually takes generations. You can't just pivot. because, for example, let's just take culture, for example, of a country. It's like an aircraft carrier. How long does it take to turn an aircraft carrier? Well, it takes quite a bit of time and a lot of effort and whatnot. Well, this topic is the same way, because we're challenging people to reconsider, if you will, reevaluate their understanding of what they've been told about the universe, and more importantly, our place in it. And so that's a pretty big pill to swallow. Now, have there been other moments like this in time? Yeah, there have been, just not in our lifetime. Case in point, maybe when mankind first came out of the cave and looked at the stars and realized that the world was much bigger. Another time may have been when they struck two rocks together, created a spark, and created fire, and now illuminated the darkness. And perhaps the last time was when mankind was standing on a beach and looked over the horizon, and someone said, you know what? I'm going to sail over the horizon. And of course, what did people say? No, you don't want to do that. You'll fall off the earth, and there's sea monsters. And of course, we chuckle about that now, but in reality, you know what? There really are sea monsters. They're just called blue whales and great white sharks and great squid of the Pacific. And they're not really monsters, are they? They're part of our natural paradigm. They're part of our normalcy, nature. And so maybe that's what we're dealing. Maybe we're just at a precipice. Maybe we're at another beach, stony beach, looking over the horizon as a species, and we're about to sail over the horizon. To me, there's a lot of hope in that. And I have a lot of faith and confidence in this next generation to pick up the baton and be bold enough to ask the hard questions. Don't be afraid, be fearless, be who you normally are. This topic deserves the truth be known. This topic deserves your involvement. And you are very much part of this effort, whether people want to admit it or not, or want to acknowledge it. They are, because this topic affects every single human being on this planet, and it affects them equally and yet differently, depending on how you were raised and your culture and your religion and whatnot.
You feel we'll come to a point in time where the entire truth will be known?
I'm not sure there's such a thing as an entire truth. Again, Ross, great question. You're asking me a question that I think our species, it's in our DNA to always seek the entire truth, but I'm not sure we're capable of truly ever understanding the entire truth. Let's look at something quite, something we take for granted that's quite normal all the time. There's a distinction between what we call a personal truth and a universal truth. So what do I mean by that? Well, a personal truth is something like your religion, maybe your political affiliation and whatnot, and how you feel, how you ascribe yourself, maybe culturally. That's a personal truth. What is a universal truth? Well, that's gravity. Gravity is an example of universal truth. And yet, as fundamental as gravity is, we still don't understand it. We still don't, to this day, know whether it's a particle like a graviton, or is it a wave, or is it a field? What is gravity? What is mass, right? What is love? What is human emotion? And so, we take a lot of these things for granted, but we still don't have a really good understanding scientifically, or even emotionally or philosophically, what these things mean. I'm sure if you talk to anybody on the street, they'll tell you they know what love is, but ask them to describe it. Well, that's a little bit more challenging. And so here we are, faced with perhaps one of the greatest paradigm moments of our species of all time. Are we alone in the universe? Well, it looks like we're not. That you're just now getting to the point where we can start even asking the right questions. So to whether or not we can know the whole truth, I'm not sure our species will ever be able to know the whole truth, simply because we may not have the capacity. We may not have the fundamental tools to do it. Let me give you a case in point. I don't want to drag this on too long. And I have other questions. Look, you sense and I sense the world around us through 5 fundamental senses: what you can hear, taste, touch, smell, etc. And yet we know the reality is that, for example, let's just take vision, is a very narrow slice, we call the electro-optical spectrum, right? A very narrow band within the greater electromagnetic spectrum. This phone, this silly little phone that really isn't so smart, can perceive the world through things such as GPS and cell phone signals and AM and FM. To us, we can't, and yet this reality is right in front of your face every single day, and we know it's real because it works, right? And yet it remains hidden. So 99.9% of the known universe is beyond our ability to even perceive. And then you have a scale issue, right? As as a human being, and you look around all around you, around the known universe, you have roughly 90 some billion light years of the visible universe from end to end, and we're kind of stuck in the middle. Now think about that, billions and billions of light years. It's kind of a hard number to conceive, and as infinitesimally small as we may be in that, Ross, it's important to know that there's an equal scale wise equal amount of volume of universe inside every single human being. If you look at an atom, which is 1 times 10 to the negative 26 in size, compared to the human being, well, we're the universe. And so we fit precariously right in the middle of the scale of the known universe that we have, both up and down. And yet we can only perceive or interact with anything that's just 1 degree order of magnitude above or below. Everything else remains invisible, unknown, a mystery to us, right? Things like dark energy and dark matter, which, by the way, compose of, the majority of the known universe. And so your question is very valid. Are we even capable as a species of knowing the complete truth? I don't know. I don't think we're there yet. I mean, we don't even know ourselves as a species, as a person, right? We need help. A lot of us have to go talk to a therapist to try to work out some of these things that we have going on in our brains, because frankly, we don't even understand our own emotions, let alone each other's emotions, right? Which is maybe why we go to war. And especially on a topic like this, that is something that's, where do you even begin to have a conversation like this? We're looking through everything through anthropomorphic eyes. Maybe that's not the answer.
That's fascinating. You've made comments about the term UFO before, unidentified flying object, and that not necessarily being accurate anymore because flying may not be accurately describing what's actually going on. Can you describe that a little bit more?
Yeah, sure. So people say all the times, well, Lou, why are you trying to rewrite history and change the name UFO? Well, I'm not. First of all, it was the government's decision to do that, and we call it unidentified aerial phenomenon. And in reality, it's because, well, it's 2 reasons. One, there's a lot of stigma associated with UFOs. The moment you say UFOs, people immediately think tinfoil hats and, things like Elvis on the Mothership or silly little conferences where people dress up in green morph suits. And in reality, we're not talking about that at all.
Right.
When you say UFO, in reality, that term came up a long time ago when we thought these things were actually flying. Now, what is flight? Well, according to physics, there's 4 fundamental things you have to consider. There's thrust, lift, drag, and weight. And when you understand those four concepts, you can develop wings and thrust and lifting bodies and create flight. But flight is a result of lift. Well, the things that we're seeing don't necessarily have wings. They don't have any obvious signs of propulsion. They don't have engines. They don't have intakes. They don't have any type of ailerons, elevators, rudders, control surfaces. And yet somehow, Ross, are able to defy the natural effects of Earth's gravity. How is that possible? Well, there's only 3 ways we know how to do it as a species. And one is through flight. Another way is through buoyancy, or think of a hot air balloon or a helium balloon. You have a density inside a cavity that's less than the density outside, so it rises. And then the last way we know how is through sheer ballistics, right? If I blow something out of a tube with enough energy, it's going to go up until it finally comes back down. But that's really the only 3 ways we know how to defy Earth's gravity. And yet these things are able to do it seemingly without any of those associated technologies that we're used to seeing. And so to say that these things are flying may not even be an accurate depiction within the world of physics to describe what they're doing. They're in the sky, they're definitely in the air, but we're also seeing them potentially underwater. We're also potentially seeing them in low Earth orbit and in space. So the term UFO is probably not even really accurate or applicable anymore. Our understanding of the phenomenon has changed significantly.
And so the thought behind these craft is, or rather, are you of the belief that they may actually just be bending space-time around their craft?
Well, belief should hopefully come from data. We had a lot of smart people, a lot of scientists and astrophysicists that were working this problem. This wasn't world according to Lue. I'm certainly not a smart enough man to come up with those scientific and mathematical formulas. This was a result of decades worth of work by some very, very smart individuals who understand physics and science very well. And in essence, it appears that what we are seeing is technology that is not necessarily breaking the laws of physics, but understands the laws of physics perhaps better than we do. And so you have the 5 fundamental observables that we've seen associated with these craft. And of course, the first question people say is, well, how do we know it's not our own technology? Well, okay, because there's a way to know that. In the intelligence community, for some people, it's their job to know that. So you bring the best and brightest to come in and say, look, this is what we're seeing. Well, let's look at the 5 observables very quickly. You have instantaneous acceleration, hypersonic velocity, low observability, transmedium travel, and what we call in vernacular anti-gravity. Do we have vehicles that can go hypersonic? Sure, not a lot. Case in point, what is Mach 5? What is hypersonics? Well, speeds in excess of Mach 5 or above. So 5 times the speed of sound. Let's take the SR-71 Blackbird, Lockheed YF-12A. It can do barely Mach 5, but if it wants to take a right-hand turn, it takes roughly half the state of Ohio to do it. Well, what we are seeing are things that are going 3, 4, 5 times that velocity, in some cases 12, 13,000 miles an hour, and are able to do instantaneous right-hand turns. Certainly, G-force is well beyond anything that we have from a material science perspective. And certainly if there was something biological inside from our observation, the G-forces would be so great it would turn them into mashed potatoes. And yet these things are able to do exactly that. How is that possible? Well, we know that our technology is only capable of this, and we know that most of the enemy's technology is only capable of that. And so therein lies the conundrum. You have this delta where the things are operating so far beyond anything that we've ever been able to really even conceive. And let's look at this from a temporal perspective. These activities have been going on now for over 75 years, possibly hundreds, if not thousands of years. We have government documentation substantiating, as a matter of fact, that these things have been around in our controlled US airspace now for decades. Now, what country in the 50s had that technology? Well, we were just entering the jet age. We hadn't even gone to space yet. We just unlocked the secrets of the atom, right? To say that there was some country out there that had developed this technology in the 50s is just, it doesn't make sense. That would be like walking into King Tut's tomb and finding a complete 747 aircraft intact. You wouldn't expect to see that because they just weren't there technologically. Well, the same holds true for us. A lot of people, maybe your young audience may not be aware, in 2004, we had an event called the Tic Tac event involving the USS Nimitz. Carrier strike group. And what made it so interesting is that same Tic Tac was reported in the 60s and the 50s as a white flying throat lozenge or a white flying butane tank. Wow. But you can see a white Tic Tac versus a white butane tank. It's the same vehicle and still reported doing the same thing. So we've been dealing with this. Whoever has this technology, we've been dealing with this for a while.
So if possible, let's remove the UAP UFO topic from this disclosure process, because going back, you said it was a process that's probably going to take multiple generations to fully get figured out. So when that is all said and done, what do you think are going to be some of the biggest takeaways we learn about ourselves?
Oh my gosh, Ross, again, fantastic question. I hope it instills a sense of both humility and awe. Our species is capable of so much good and also so much hatred. And when we are confronted with the reality that perhaps we share this universe with something or someone else, maybe it will force us to reevaluate the way we treat each other. Maybe we realize that there's something much bigger out there and we probably should learn how to get along and try to act as a global citizen, right? Rather than looking at imaginary lines on a globe or a map and saying, well, this is mine, and well, that's yours. And, you stay over there, I'll stay over here, and whatnot. We are still a very basic species. We are still prone to a lot of the selfish pursuits that we have been plagued with for millennia. We are a very selfish species, and we need to learn to rise above that. If I may have one message for your young group,
please,
for the love of God, don't make the mistakes we made, please. Look, you have a responsibility right now. My suggestion is in some cases, be very careful what you do and how you approach things. I guess case in point, think for yourself, please. Let's not forget that we have a moral obligation and responsibility to our fellow citizens to do what's right. And please, we must avoid being selfish. We must avoid the dopamine hit, the quick fix of, hey, it's all about me. It's not. It's all about we. It's all about all of us. We're all in this together. And if we all think it's just about me, then I don't know how long we're going to be here as a species, because our survival depends on all of us working together. And if it's just about me, then it creates a situation where outlook is pretty bleak. Especially now with all these distractions we have. We were talking earlier, Ross, you have things like a global pandemic like COVID, and you have, financial instability and political strife. And now you have military operations going on in Europe, which, are pretty scary for some people. And that's just the beginning. If we want to avoid the same issues in the future, we have got to take our heads sometimes out of the screen, and we're going to have to start working together. Let's not be distracted with the latest fashion trends, right? I get on the news, and I unfortunately half of it is people in Hollywood, which people know I had a TV show, right? But I'm not a Hollywood guy. We have people dying right now in the streets of Ukraine, and this horrible issue we're dealing with now with our fellow citizens being slaughtered on the street. And yet people are more interested in what Xbox game is going to come out next, or what next movie they want to watch on download from Netflix. We're in danger of losing it all if our young people don't get engaged now and start realizing that this future belongs to them, not me, not us. We did our fair share of screwing it up. It's up to you now. It's our future is directly in your hands. And if you don't learn from our mistakes, then you're going to be guilty of repeating the same sins that we did.
It's interesting because going back to disclosure is a process, and all the work that you've done since 2017, you and your team. Am I wrong to have sensed a little bit of urgency in this as well?
There is a sense of urgency because, people said, well, why now? Well, because it's not on our time scale, not on our timeline. It's not up to us. They're here, whether we want to acknowledge it or not. They're here. The question is why? What's the purpose? We need to start asking ourselves some pretty direct questions about this topic. There is a sense of urgency because every day that we fail to acknowledge and recognize what's really going on, we stay in the veil of darkness. This is real. This is here. This is now. Our country has already acknowledged. I mean, I hate to say this, but disclosure's already happened. We now have the acknowledgement from former and current directors of national intelligence and CIA and presidents. And I mean, everybody says, yeah, it's real. It's here. Now, the question is, we don't know what it is or where it's from or what they want and who's behind the wheel and intentions and whatnot. So to some regard, the hard part is still yet to come. The easier part was acknowledging the reality, taking your head out of the sand and finally looking and say, you're right. Okay, yeah, you're right. That's real. The real hard part now, the challenge is, okay, what do we do about it? And can we even agree as a people what we should do about it? And that's why we need our young people talking and engaged. Because ultimately, look, I've got more sunsets than I have sunrises in my life. That's a fact. But young people don't, and they have a choice. Do you want to live in darkness, or do you want to live with truth? And for me, I don't think as a society we can talk about truth and freedom as mutually exclusive. If you want to truly be a free people, you must be a people that has the truth. You have to know what reality is and what it isn't. There's an old saying, in some spiritual books, I won't say which, but this is the truth shall set you free. That's also one of the monikers for the Central Intelligence Agency, an organization I happen to know a little bit about. Truth equals freedom. Freedom equals truth. And the truth may not be necessarily good. You may not like the truth, like we talk about cancer, right? If you have cancer, you want your doctor to be honest with you. Hey, look, you got cancer. But we can do something about it. Um, but ultimately, at the end of the day, that's what our species is about. Look, Galileo faced this when he was trying to further the theorems of Copernicus, and he had said that the Earth was not the center of the solar system, and there were people that even refused to look through his telescope, right? And he almost died for that and had to recant. Ultimately, turns out that he was right. The Earth isn't the center of the solar system, but that's okay. Why? Because it's the truth, and it's a universal truth. And I think ultimately, at the end of the day, it didn't disrupt anything. It didn't have the effects that some people were afraid it would have on society and religion. In fact, some would argue probably bolstered some people's faith in their religion, because it expanded the idea that a creator has no boundaries, right? So, that's I think ultimately the truth is what it is, and we need to pursue it no matter what. Let's put our feelings aside. I also think there's a lot of hope and excitement. I think this is exciting times. I think this generation may be the first generation in the history of our species. Think about that for a minute. The history of this planet, to recognize that, what, we're not alone. And frankly, for me, that's probably that's people say, well, if we're alone in this universe, to me, that's terrifying. That to me is more terrifying than knowing we're not alone. Because there's a lot of empty blackness out there in space, and it to me it'd be nice to know that maybe life is very pervasive, just maybe not the way we think about life. But if you were to compare a tree, right, the tree is very much alive. It replicates and it breathes and it takes nourishment. But it really, if you compare that to, let's say, a human, there's very little in common, right? I mean,
Right.
plant cells versus animal cells. It doesn't think, it doesn't walk around, it doesn't do what we do, and yet it is very much alive. And I think we need to be prepared to, as diverse as life may be on this planet, now multiply that by a factor of 1 billion, right? What's the possibilities now if life is so diverse here on this planet, right? There's life that even doesn't require photosynthesis. There was a time when I grew up, my generation, oh, all life depends on photosynthesis. Well, that's not true. There's animals now that we know rely, extremophiles that rely on chemosynthesis.
Yep.
In the dark, deep depths of our oceans, by what they call black smokers, and in the deepest parts of the Antarctic ice, there's life everywhere. And so maybe life isn't really just specific to our little blue marble floating in space. Maybe it's far more profound. Maybe we're part of a much bigger collective. And because of that, now we have a responsibility, really, really, to take care of ourselves and our planet, because it's not just us living here, right? It's not just us humans. Well, if we do something stupid, well, it's only us that we have to worry about. Well, no.
Yeah.
Now we have a stewardship responsibility, right? Now we're sharing this space with other things, and because of that, now we have to maybe act a little bit more responsibly.
Yeah. And when you look at it from the perspective, like you just said, billions of planets, billions of galaxies, who knows, maybe billions of universes, it becomes pretty clear that we probably would not even be able to recognize.
Yeah, level. Ross, let's put this in real statistical terms. Okay. There are in our little Milky Way galaxy, there are billions of stars. Most of those stars have some sort of planets around them. And then within our outside of our galaxy, within the local cluster, there are lots and lots of galaxies, and there's billions of galaxies in the visible universe alone. In fact, scientists have speculated that there are more stars in the visible universe than there are grains of sand on all the beaches of all the world. Now, think about that for a moment. That is profound.
It's almost impossible to conceptualize.
Well, it is, right?
Yeah.
And so, statistically speaking, yeah, probably life is everywhere. We see it here, and we're beginning to, have data that suggests it's been here for a while, and it's not just us. There's the discussion on viruses, right? If you talk to some doctors now, some have actually speculated vis-a-vis a notion called transpermia, that viruses may not be from Earth. because they don't have DNA. They're not really recognized as a life form like we know it, and yet they replicate and they defend themselves and they do all the things that life does. And so we've had to, every time we put a box around what life, our definition of what life is, Mother Nature always comes out and scoots out under the box and proves us that it has to have a bigger box. Life, right. We can't fit it all into that little tiny box. And I think that may be true from this perspective. There's lots of examples that we see all around us of what life is. Another example is up to 100 some years ago, we as a species really recognize only 3 types of life forms, and that was animal kingdom, plant kingdom, and fungi. And for a long time, even fungus were confused as being plants, right? And as diverse and different as those kingdoms are, it was only the last 100 years that we discovered a whole new kingdom of life on this planet. And and as crazy as it may seem, this whole new kingdom of life has been invisible to us forever. It's just now coming into focus. And what is that kingdom of life? Well, it's the life of the microorganisms, right? It's the life, a whole other kingdom of life forms that has been existing on this planet, but we just can't see it because it's too small, right? And how big is this? How big is this kingdom? Well, turns out that if you take all the biomass of every animal on this planet and mix it with the biomass of every plant on this planet and mix it with the biomass of all the fungus on this planet, it still isn't going to equate to a fraction of the biomass of this hidden kingdom that's been in front of us this entire time. And so we as a species, we tend to be conceited a lot. We think that we have all the answers. How well we discovered everything there is to discover. Aha, not really. Mother Nature always has a trick up her sleeve, and we need to acknowledge that. We need to respect that and recognize that that we're always learning the truth, and we have to be prepared for that. The truth will reveal herself if we ask the right questions, and we have to have the courage to ask those questions.
Speaking of that, some of these upcoming questions I have are just going to be yes or no. Obviously, if you can't answer them, by all means, and feel free to elaborate wherever you see fit. I'm going to use the word entities kind of a lot. And by entities, I feel like I need to elaborate on that given the topic. But entities, I mean more individuals, contractors, private companies, public companies, that all-encompassing aspect of that. So, Lou, are you of the belief that the United States government or entities currently or previously connected to the United States government have substantial enough evidence that whatever this phenomena is has been interacting with the human inhabitants of this planet in a physical abduction-like manner?
Ross, it's too early to tell. There is anecdotal information to suggest that whatever this is has been here for a while. There's information to suggest that whatever this is has a keen interest in our activities, human activities. There is some anecdotal evidence to suggest that there may have been people who have interacted to some degree with this. What that interaction is remains to be known at this point. Let's talk about that for just a moment. And I know you want a yes or no question. People say, well, have we communicated with them or have they communicated with us? Well, what does that mean, right? Does it mean sitting down here and having a conversation like this? Well, there's nonverbal communication we do all the time. You can whistle to your dog and you're communicating a message. I can wave to you from across the room and I'm communicating an intent. In fact, when a Russian surveillance aircraft comes flying off the coast of California and we scramble 2 F-22 interceptors, we're communicating a message. We're not talking to them, but we're communicating an intent and a message. So I think we have to reevaluate when we say, has there been any type of real communication here? Well, some would say absolutely. The fact that they're being provocative and flying in and around our controlled U.S. airspace, and we're seeing them, we're recording them, that is a form of communication. It's just not maybe verbal in a way that we understand, right?
Makes total sense. Are you of the belief that the United States government or entities currently or previously connected to the United States government have substantial enough evidence that whatever this phenomena is has played a role in shaping humanity?
I think it's too early to tell to make a determination one way or the other, or an assessment how much influence this topic, this phenomenon, UAPs or UFOs, has had in the development of our species. I don't think it's inconceivable. We do know that things such as weather and climate can affect our species, and things like an ice age will definitely affect our species. Things like a global pandemic like COVID can affect our species. Um, is it possible that whatever is out there has been here for a while and has had some sort of influence on our species? I think it's certainly conceivable. I think it's too early to tell one way or the other that is a substantiated fact. But there's historical records in religious texts going way back to including the Judeo-Christian faith system that these things have been around for a while. When I was at the Vatican, they some individuals there had provided some very compelling evidence to suggest that we've been dealing with this phenomenon for quite some time.
Are you of the belief that evidence will eventually be released?
I don't know how you can't release this information eventually. As I've said before, disclosure is a process. It's not an event.
Right.
It takes time. It takes time to chew the elephant, right? You have to do it one bite at a time. Otherwise, you run the risk of choking. I do think if we continue to ask the right questions, we will get the answers that we're seeking. But therein lies the challenge. We have to ask the right questions, and we have to be fearless in our pursuit of the truth, whatever that truth may be. We must have the courage to pursue that truth.
I have two follow-up questions from your appearance on Kurt's Theory of Everything podcast, which I'll link both episodes below. I'm going to quote something you said on your first appearance when discussing Skinwalker Ranch. You said, "This is a very complex universe we live in. It's a system. We're learning more and more about the reality of life and the transition of what birth means and the transition of what death means in human consciousness and human spirit." So that middle part really hits home, I think, especially nowadays, for a lot of people around the world. Can you provide any more context on what you meant by learning more about the transition of life and the transition of death?
Sure. Well, life and death are natural events. In fact, death is just as natural as birth. It is a moment of transition, biologically, electrochemically, biochemically, and we don't understand it very well. Most human beings talk about the time that they're here on this planet. Let's put it into terms maybe that a little bit easier to digest. I am Luis Elizondo, and if I let's say get into a terrible traffic accident, I lose my arm, am I still Luis? Well, yeah, I am. In fact, if I were to, unfortunately, let's say when I was in combat, have something bad happen to me and I lose both my arms and my legs, am I still Luis? Well, I think most people would argue, yeah, you're still Lou. In fact, what defines me isn't the way I look, isn't this shell. And in fact, if I were to, let's say, suffer a traumatic brain injury, let's say I got injured in a car accident, that same car accident, right? And now I have a brain injury. Am I still Luis Elizondo? Well, I am. I may be intellectually impaired, but I'm still Lou, right? So if we agree that the body doesn't define who Lou is or Ross or anybody else, and the intellect, the brain doesn't, then there must be something else. There must be another quality that defines who Lou is versus Ross or anybody else. And I think most people feel that. And whether you want to call that a spirit, or as different cultures call it a chi or a id or whatever you want to call it, right? Or the soul, that there's a quality there that isn't necessarily tied to the physicality, the organic vessel, right? The carbon system. Because you and I, if you compared our DNA, would be 99.87% the same, with some minor variations. So it's not the carbon unit that defines who we are, and it's probably not the intellectual aspect of our brain. There's something else. Is that part, that quality, is that indelible? Is that something that is perhaps and I want to be careful what I say here. I don't want people to misconstrue. When I say the word interdimensional, I don't mean it in a sort of woo-woo science fiction sort of way. What I simply mean is that there are realities all around us that we simply do not have the tools to interact with. We talked about earlier about this cell phone, how it can see if you had cell phone vision, you could see GPS and you could see cell signal, and you could see Wi-Fi and all the things that we can't interact with. And it's a very real part of our reality. Is that the same thing with the soul or whatever it is, right? That defines who we are as individuals. And is that indelible? Well, we know that there have been some interesting experiments medically and scientifically that substantiate that there's probably some sort of ingredient in each human being that is it's very hard to define, but is very real. That's beyond the intellectual part of the brain and the body. We use brain waves to determine if someone is alive or dead. If they've been suffered a terrible accident, they're in a coma, for example, and that's what doctors use to pull to make the decision whether or not to pull the plug. We're now realizing that people can be brain dead and still be alive and potentially even conscious. And people come back with these near death experiences where they report almost this hyper reality, right? This hyper existence. So the biochemical process of the brain aren't necessary. I mean, they're required to sustain life here, right? The body needs the brain because the brain tells the heart to beat and the body to breathe. But the brain also needs the body as well, because the body provides the regulatory functions and provides oxygen to the brain. So both the brain and the body need each other. But it appears there may be another extra ingredient in human beings and sentient, what we call sentient life forms, that is beyond that. And it's poorly understood. I think that's where religion comes into play to try to better answer that. Science hasn't come very far in explaining the how, where religion, is more trying to explain the why. And I think it's probably that's where religion comes into play so much, because it can help people grapple that question of what it means to be a human being. Because ultimately, what does it mean to be human? Is human something? I mean, a chimpanzee looks like a human, and it can caress its loved ones and eat like we do and do a lot of things we do, even put in little silly outfits and it'll dance. But is it really human? Right? Is 5 fingers and five toes and biradial symmetry, does that define a human being? Well, I would submit to you that it probably doesn't. There's something else, something more indelible, something that is far more reaching. And I think a lot of people feel it. It's like love, right? We all agree it's the real, but it's really hard to describe. Everybody has a slightly different perspective on what it means to them. And so that may be the same thing with the human spirit. It may be something that scientifically is hard to measure. It's like dark energy, right? Or dark matter. We know it's there. We can't measure it yet. We don't have the technology or the capability or the understanding of what it is.
That's a lot to sit on.
Well,
It's that in a great way, obviously, because, just like I said, kind of looking around the world right now, I think that kind of sentiment can provide a lot of people a lot of hope. So I appreciate this topic.
And it's not false hope. Look, I've seen the best and worst of mankind within seconds of each other, on the battlefield. And without going too far down the rabbit hole, there's plenty to suggest that this experience is all but a phase, and it's transitory, and we come in and we go out, but the human experience doesn't end there. The human experience perhaps continues to develop and evolve, hopefully over time.
So you talk about what you just said, that you've seen both sides of that play out very close to each other. Is that where your interest in the human soul and the human spirit began? It seems like over the past year that's been a topic that you've been bringing up a little bit more and more. And how has your opinion changed since you became involved in the UAP topic concerning the human soul and the human spirit?
Sure. Well, it hasn't changed. I've always been very private about it.
That's great.
At the end of the day, my opinions are just my opinions. They're just mine. And I don't expect anybody to subscribe to them. I'm just sharing my thoughts. I don't do it very often because I think people have a tendency to hang on to words and perhaps, my job is not to teach people what to think. I prefer to teach people how to think, right?
Yep.
Give people the ability to learn how to think for themselves, and then they come up with their own conclusions. I have been part of some extraordinary events in history. I have personally witnessed things that that can only be classified as extraordinary. And I can't explain it. I don't understand it. Doesn't make it any less real. And the only reason why I've been getting more into this over the last year is because people have been asking me. My opinions haven't changed. The topic of UFOs hasn't changed my perspective. It's, if anything, it's expanded a little bit of my perspective. As far as being involved in the UFO community, sad to say, I'm really not. I'm not a UFO guy. I never have been. I'm not a ufologist. I'm not into anything like that. I'm just an ex-intelligence officer that happened to have a job for almost a decade involving UFOs. And the conclusions that we came to, I think, are the conclusions that any rational-minded person would have. They'd be the same. I'm not extraordinary in any way. In fact, I'm surprisingly unextraordinary in every sense of the term. I'm very average. I didn't get particularly awesome grades in college, and I, made a lot of mistakes in my life. I'm very, very ordinary. But I have been through some extraordinary times, and it has allowed me to gain a perspective, a personal perspective that I don't expect everybody to share. But I have seen enough through my own eyes that was what provided enough compelling information for me to make a decision. Look, my background's science, right? I went to college to be microbiology, immunology, and parasitology. By the way, not parapsychology, parasitology, study of parasites. My minors were in mathematics and chemistry. So, I believe in the scientific method. But I also know that science has limitations. And at least it does now, until we learn more. There's fundamental principles of even matter and energy and gravity. We still don't even know what the hell it is. I mean, we all agree it's real, but still don't know what it really is. So there's limitations to our understanding. I think it's important to realize that. Look, I don't want to scare anybody, but to do this mental exercise for just a second, and maybe you'll see where I'm going with this.
Sure.
You and I are having a wonderful conversation, and you have a great audience that's listening. And we all, we're humans, and we like to set up these nice little boundaries and boxes around us so we know where we are in the city and in our state. And we have things called cities and states and countries and national borders. But in reality, do we really, really, really know where we are? Well, the answer is no, we don't. If let's just say you pop into existence all of a sudden in the universe, nothing around, just you would have no way, unless you see somebody in front of you, you have no way to tell if you're up, down, left, right. Are you moving? How big you are, how small you are, because there's nothing to compare yourself to. It's just you and empty space. Now, all of a sudden, Ross, I pop into existence, and now it's just you and me, right? Well, you can see that I'm kind of far away from you, but reality is I don't know how far we really are away, because we could be light years apart if I'm the size of a galaxy and you're the size of a galaxy. But if I'm the size of an atom, and you're the size of an atom, we could be very close to each other. So there's no scale, and there's no sense of motion unless I'm moving relative to you. That we don't know if we're moving fast or moving slow. There's nothing to compare it to. So ultimately, you put enough points in there, and everything we have in the universe, our understanding of the universe, is based upon observations of each other, not ourselves, right? I'm looking at you. You're 5'6". Okay, I'm 5'7", so I'm an inch taller. You're about 3 feet away from me, so therefore I'm 3 feet away from you, and we're moving. And that's how we judge where we are. But in reality, our entire universe could really be within an atom of a bigger universe, or it could be the biggest part of reality, of the existence. Maybe it is really that big, and we are, again, we see in the scale of life where we fit right in the middle, but we still don't know where we are. We know where we are in this little blue ball hurling around an obscure part of an obscure galaxy that we happen to call the Milky Way, amongst billions and billions of other galaxies. But we don't know if we're up or down or left or right. We don't. There's nothing. We're here. We're part of everything. And I know it's disconcerting for some people to think that way, but I tend to think it's kind of beautiful. I think it's kind of wonderful that we are all in this together. We're all connected. This is part of our reality. And it's not that we are, as a friend of mine says, not that we're here observing the universe. We are the universe. We're part of it. We are in it. The atoms in this hand could have come from a different supernova, a different star than the atoms in this hand, and are billions and billions and billions of years old. We are the universe. And I think there's beauty in that. I do. I think there's some poetry there.
That's really beautiful. And it reminds me, and I know you're familiar with this as well, and this is one that's been coming up in my head a lot recently. Carl Sagan's Pale Blue Dot. I think that's
absolutely.
I think that's so incredibly fitting for these days. And that's actually, I normally talk about comic book stuff. I actually thought about just kind of changing things up and kind of doing a rendition of that.
Yeah, I mean, the Pale Blue Dot, if anybody's never seen it before, I suggest they take a look at that. Just type in a search engine, Pale Blue Dot, and look at that 4 pixelated blue speck in the vastness of this empty black inky vacuum. And that's your every hope, dream, everything that has ever occurred in our history occurred on that tiny little speck. There's another picture. If you ever have a chance, there's a picture of the lunar orbiter rendezvousing with the lunar lander, and it was taken by the guy who was in the lunar orbiter. And you see it coming up, and you see the Earth in the background. And what most people don't realize is that every single living thing that ever existed was in that one picture, except for one human being, and that was the guy taking the picture of Earth and the lunar orbiter coming up. Every single thing, every history book, every strife, every victory, every figure in history was hypothetically contained in that one photograph. Our entire reality, except for one human being. And I thought that was kind of neat.
It is. Can you imagine being the human being taking that picture?
Whew. Isn't that something?
Oh my gosh! How do you?
Well, how about
after that? Yeah.
How about the Voyager spacecraft? Right. I mean, people don't realize that little golden record, that little expression where they have a soundtrack from Mozart, right, is going to be long after our little tiny planet is engulfed by our sun, when our sun becomes a red giant and engulfs the inner planets, and our planet becomes a little smoldering cinder and eventually gone, right? That single expression of mankind will still be out there. That one last memory of who we were as a species, and our creativity and our art and our love will still be out there in deep space for billions and billions and billions of years. That little ambassador, little humble probe that we built and have long since forgotten, will ultimately be the ambassador of our species. Forgive me. Sorry.
Oh, you're good. Don't worry about it.
I apologize. This thing never ends. I'm going to
I can't imagine
right now.
No, I know you've only got a couple minutes left. So, I mean,
no. I just say that because, it puts into perspective of what, really how small we are, and yet how capable we are, right? On one hand, we're insignificant pale blue dot, and yet we have managed to send out an emissary representing us. That I mean, we look at the pyramids and say, wow, the things are 5,000 years old, but already they're turning into dust.
Yeah.
This thing is going to be out there for potentially forever. And it's us. It represents us. I think there's a lot of beauty there. I really do. And we created with our own hands, right? And our own brains and our own imagination. And this is why I have so much hope for this generation, because that's the kind of stuff that makes the species so great. That's as terrible as we are to each other, we have these terrible things called war and whatnot. We're also capable of such beauty and such creativity. And for me, that's ultimately to kind of go back to what we started about this conversation about hope, right? Yeah. That's what gives me hope about this generation, because they're the best of humanity. And I think we're in good shape. If the future's in their hands, I just hope that they learn from our lessons. I think there's a bright future ahead of us.
It's very humbling to think about. And also, didn't they put a Chubby Checker song on that album?
They actually they also put a star map of where we are, and some scientists are now kind of reconsidering, like, probably not a good idea. Maybe we don't necessarily want to advertise where we live, right?
Yeah, not yet. But weren't we technically starting to advertise where we lived back in the 30s, where we were putting out all the, radio and television signals?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. In fact, yeah, I mean, look, the truth be told, we probably were advertising, long before that, not even techno signatures, but because of
Can you expand on that? That's interesting.
Well, look at the habitability of our planet, right? We know that water, H2O, is a fundamental aspect of a vast majority of life. Not all life, but a vast majority of it. We now have the capabilities, and we're not that sophisticated, where we can detect water molecules on other planets in other solar systems, right? So if water is a fundamental aspect of life universally, not just here on this planet, and by the way, that's a big if, we don't know that's the case, then it's foreseeable that if there was a technologically advanced species out there, it would have detected the ingredients, the stuff of Earth, long before we ever even were walking on two legs. And this is why it's possible these things have been here for quite a long time. They may be just as natural to Earth as we are. We're just at the point now where technologically we're beginning to interact with UAPs and UFOs, but they may not be from the Pleiades or Alpha Proxima or anything like that. They may be from right here, and they're just as natural as we are, and normal. It just we're at the point where we're beginning to start to interact.
So they may not even have any interest in us.
They might not, or they do, but it's simply as a matter of just observing us. Like, we go to Africa and we monitor the wildebeest migration, and once in a while we'll fly on a helicopter and we'll dart one right. And I'm sure if you ask a wildebeest who wakes up with a hell of a headache and says, "What the hell was that? I saw this flying thing land and dirt everywhere. And next thing you know, I woke up and my butt's sore." So maybe maybe I mean, I'm being a little facetious, of course, but you get my drift, right?
Totally, absolutely. Let me see. I had a couple other ones here. Are you of the belief that the United States government or entities currently or previously connected to the United States government have a clearer definition of what consciousness is compared to the general public or the scientific community?
I don't believe that's the case. I do believe that we've spent a lot of time and money in the past trying to figure it out, things through old colleagues of mine who ran programs like Stargate remote viewing program, or in the vernacular, psychic spying. Mm-hmm. But I don't think we understand it. I don't think we have a complete picture of it. Did
any of those studies involve psychedelics?
They did. Yeah. Some of the things like the electric Kool-Aid acid test and lysogenic, it's LSD. Unfortunately, we did some things, that were certainly not ethical. We experimented on people. We did things as a government without the people's consent, and that's a problem. That's one of the reasons why I want full transparency on this topic, and frankly, not just this topic, but anything that the government has had considered to be super sensitive, but really wasn't classified. The overclassification, I think, is a problem in our country. We tend to classify things that we do because of sheer embarrassment, not because of sources of methods or fear of compromising, just simply because we don't want to be embarrassed. And I think that's problematic.
Do any of the studies involving the phenomenon, did any of those involve psychedelics?
Not with the U.S. government. They may have privately, but not with the U.S. government.
Did they have any success, to your knowledge?
Some people say so. I mean, some people suggest things such as ancient shaman rituals involving ayahuasca or peyote. A lot of the indigenous or aboriginal people claim that it does do something. It unlocks a part of the brain. I will tell you that we are in the VA system, Veterans Administration, have been experimenting with ketamine for some time now in microdosing for PTSD patients. There seems to be some sort of relief there for some of our young men and women in uniform that have suffered some psychological trauma.
It's interesting you say that. I actually just started work in the psychedelic field, and we're going to be building educational platforms for that to get veterans with PTSD into some of these studies. And, people like you mentioned before with stage 4 cancer into the interventional therapies and things like that. Do you have a lot of hope for the psychedelic industry and the benefit that it can have on humanity in general?
Sure, if it's done responsibly,
Yeah,
absolutely.
that's
I
the key.
mean, I think we need to approach it from a responsible perspective. I don't think we should be looking at psychedelics as an escape from reality. I think we should be looking at psychedelics as a way to help us understand reality.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. I know I've got just a couple more questions, and then I'll let you go.
Yeah.
Probably the most important question is, how do you deal with the mental health aspect of this, especially everything that you've seen and everything that you've been through inside and outside of this UAP topic? What is your strategy here?
Well, be true to yourself. Have the courage to ask the right questions. Don't get sucked into any narratives, preconceived narratives that someone may have or someone's trying to sell you. This topic has been fraught full of hucksters and charlatans for a very long time, and that's why there's a lot of taboo and stigma associated with it. Have the courage to ask the hard questions. Please don't get suckered down into any one particular narrative, because ultimately at the end of the day, we don't know. We do not know most of the information that we're seeking. We're just now beginning to get to a point where we're asking the right questions, and realize that, look, sometimes when you expand your paradigm of reality, it can be a little scary. Think of a crab that's molting its skin, right? If you want to be a bigger crab, you want to grow, you have to break out of the shell that's protecting you. That shell may be your protection, but it will also be your prison if you're not careful. Part of the human experience is to always grow and evolve. And we see that in nature all the time, and we're no exception to that. And so sometimes that growth process can be a little painful, a little uncomfortable, feeling a little vulnerable, but it's okay. It's okay, because it's that is the way of nature and life, and it is, it is to be embraced, not feared.
It's beautiful, Lou. How do you recommend? Sorry, how do you recommend young people get involved in this topic? And I guess even a better question would almost be, how do we get more people to come have this conversation with young people?
Well, Ross, you're doing it. And the fact that young people are listening to you, you're doing it. I'm only one person. It is because of the work that you're doing, and those people that decide to tune in to you, that are making the difference. They're the ones that are telling Congress, yeah, we want you to pursue this. They're the ones that are telling mainstream media, we want you to cover this. And they're the ones doing podcasts like you do, and programs like you do, that mainstream media looks at and say, hey, you know what? These guys are right. We should be asking these questions. So what can young people be doing? Doing exactly what they're doing now, tuning in, asking the hard questions, getting involved. You don't need to take to the streets with a billboard. All you need to do is just have the conversation around the water cooler or around the dinner table sometime. That's making a difference.
Lou, I really appreciate you hopping on here, man. This really means a lot. It means a lot for, I know, my audience, who, interestingly enough, when we first talked about doing this back in November, I put out a video just kind of asking, like, if you could ask Lou anything about this topic, what would you ask him, or somebody of his caliber? And well, the first thing I took away was, do the younger generations know that something is going on? No shit. They obviously know what it is, everything else that involves in it. There's not much knowledge on that. It's actually funny. I forgot about this until right now. One of the questions that I got more than once, actually, and I think I even responded to one that said, Ross, if you could ask Lou anything and privately, knowing that he could answer you, what would you ask? And I think I responded with kind of going back to what we talked about before we recorded, nothing. I think that Lou and I would have a better time opening a bottle of scotch and just reading off some of the most heinous things that people have said to us.
That'd be great. That would be great. Yeah, I've got a lot of folks out there that don't like me very much. We could definitely have a good time with that. It's maybe haters are just an extreme form of love. I don't know. It's a shame that they're out there, but I suspect that they're probably lacking something. And I try to remind myself not to judge, and try to be as patient as I can, and always extend a hand in friendship rather than a fist in hatred. So